Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast, sponsored by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is our weekly fantasy favorites preview show for week 5. I am Dalton Brown, joined as always by the fantasy guru, sports editor of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Dell. You can find him on Twitter at Mad Journalist, at MADD Journalist. Chris, how are we feeling going into week 5?
Like always, we're on the grind, man. We're putting our data together, putting our projections together, putting the rankings together. We're updating the rankings every single day. We got some injuries to talk about. I think, Dalton, in my opinion, this is like the week of the season. We're at the quarter point, right? Like, whatever job you're in, whatever company you might work for, you've got these quarterly business reports. Like, how much money did you make? How much did this product perform? We've got to reevaluate the quarterly revenue report for some of these players. Like, what stock do we want to buy more into? What stock do we want to sell? I don't think it's always about buying low and selling high. I think you actually need to realize when should you logically buy high in a player and when it's still okay to sell low on a player, because even low stocks can still hit rock bottom and even high stocks can still go higher. So we want to cover all those nuances on this show, and I think it's a good week to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to getting into it. Just to set the stage for why Chris is the guy you should be listening to on all of this. Chris actually won the FantasyPros accuracy competition on draft accuracy last year. Out of 235 analysts, these are pros. Chris finished number 1 last season, and also through 4 weeks this season, he is number 1 in their in-season contest for rankings. So Chris's rankings have been accurate time and time again. So if you're looking for accurate judgments on players, it's going to be tough to do a heck of a lot better. So, Chris, without further ado, I think where it makes sense to start this week, injuries have been a big theme across fantasy football, and they really always are. But few new ones this week worth discussing. The biggest one of the week was Rashee Rice. Went down in that game, and it's at this point unclear whether Rashee Rice will be back this season. If he is, it looks like it might just be for the playoff run. Obviously this might mean more action for Xavier Worthy, might mean more targets for Travis Kelce. Are there any other Chiefs that you're targeting as a result of Rashee Rice's injury, or any other replacements that you think we need to have our eye on when something like this happens?
Yeah, it's a good question. People are asking me on Twitter, should I drop Rashee Rice? I would say no, don't drop Rashee Rice yet. What the plan is, so he was this podcast, well, this video, our podcast goes up right away Friday morning. We record Thursday night. We post it on YouTube on Saturday. So just whoever's listening at whatever time, just letting you know this right now. It's Thursday, and on Thursday this week, the Chiefs officially put Rashee Rice on injured reserve. What does that mean? Well, he's going to miss 4 games. I think we all know he's going to miss more than 4 games. The question is he going to miss the rest of the season? There's been some optimism around it that Mahomes is like, hey, we're excited to possibly get him back this year. What does that mean? Does that mean just for the playoffs? Does that mean like end of regular season fantasy playoffs? That's all TBD right now. Obviously, if you have an injured reserve spot, you want to use that injured reserve spot for Rashee Rice temporarily until we get confirmation. Okay, so that common sense out of the way. I think that with Travis Kelce, obviously gets a huge bump here. We saw season highs for Travis Kelce across the board this past week, and 7 catches, 89 yards on 9 targets. The thing about Kelce is that he was losing the layup routes to Rashee Rice because Rashee Rice runs a similar route tree to Kelce. It's short, intermediate, slants, quick passes. And Rashee Rice is simply the younger, more talented, this guy's got more juice type of player. But they don't have anyone to fill that role now. And Kelce's going to go back to being the primary target in that role. What I will say in deeper leagues, Noah Gray is an intriguing stash. He himself had 4 catches for 40 yards. And if God forbid something happens to a very old Travis Kelce, Noah Gray could step into some pretty serious volume there in a short passing attack. Xavier Worthy, I think there's so much varying opinion on him right now. Gauge the market. Like, I think he's worth buying for the right price. I also think he's worth selling for the right price. If you've got somebody in the league that's a Chiefs fan, a Mahomes fan, or maybe just is like, hey, this guy ran such a fast 40-yard dash time and now Rice is out. it's going to be all Worthy. He caught the long touchdown. Xavier Worthy still not running a full set of routes. It's about 70% or so. What I was encouraged by is that in week 4, he ran a season-high slot route rate of 40%. You can't just rely on a guy to only get deep targets because those won't always connect on a week-to-week basis. But with Xavier Worthy, if they can, try to maybe be a Rashee Rice light and still run the traditional Worthy deep routes, then you're cooking with something there. So again, it's all about acquisition cost. I think you could buy him for the right price. You could sell him. And then outside of that, I'm not touching Watson. I'm not touching Juju. Outside of you got to be in a 16-team league or deeper, in my opinion, to do something like that. And 98%, 99% of people listening to this are not in a league like that. I think the running backs are worth talking about just for a second, like Kareem Hunt. He was the clear best running back in that game. He's familiar with the system. He's essentially had a year off because he didn't play a lot late last year. 14 carries for 69 yards, averaging 5 yards a carry. Carson Steele is a converted fullback with not a lot of speed. Kareem Hunt, he's older now and he's not as fast as he used to be, but Carson Steele's not really any more athletic than him still. So that's Carson Steele. You're a young player. You're kind of giving that opportunity. You have 2 fumbles. The fumble this week, there was a fumble late last week as well in week 3. So I think Carson Steele's a drop. Kareem Hunt is actually a worthy add, in my opinion. However, in deeper leagues, you still want to add Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was activated this week. He was dealing with some type of post-traumatic stress, so a personal incident, not injury-related. So he's fully healthy. They also trust him, and they're still using Pirine a little bit. So, yes, this could be an ugly 3-way running back committee, but I do think there is an opportunity for CEH and Hunt specifically to carve out value as a RB2 flex play in this offense with Pirine kind of as the third wheel. So I do think there still is a little bit of value on the running backs there as well.
Another guy who is currently listed as questionable. It doesn't seem that he's likely that he plays this week. Jonathan Taylor dealing with the high ankle issue. It seems like from everything that we're hearing, Trey Surman would be the pickup off waivers for the Colts. What do you make of that? Because it seems like Jonathan Taylor's likely to miss. Do you think Trey Surman is startable?
I do. We'll get to our running back rankings in a little bit. We're going to talk injuries, then a little bit of rest of season trade value stuff, and then we'll spend the most of the second half of the show on the position by position rankings, right? So, for example, I'm bringing that up now because it's relevant to this question. It's kind of a 2-pronged effect here with Surman. I've got him ranked as RB25, right? Why do I put someone at 25? Well, most leagues start 2 running backs, and most leagues have 12 teams. So you're talking about who's an RB1, who's an RB2. That's the top 24, right? I put Trey Surman right at 25. He's on paper, it's enough to get him into that category because without Jonathan Taylor, this is one of the most efficient running games in the league right now. They have a really good matchup at Jacksonville, who's not been able to stop anybody defensively. And Surman has looked good on some limited touches here, man. Let's not completely write this guy's career away after he was a bust himself a couple years ago with San Francisco. He hasn't done much this year. He scored a touchdown in week 3, had 2 carries for 16 yards. Hasn't really had much of an opportunity other than that. But this team has basically made him the de facto RB2 for the entire offseason. So they see something in him. I would say in deeper leagues, Tyler Goodson is also a stash. He got some decent playing time last season when Jonathan Taylor missed time as well. So I think Surman can be started this week in deeper leagues if you're desperate. Just for context, RB21 and onward, I don't really feel great about them. So talking about, I have currently Ramondre Stevenson ranked as my RB21, Etienne RB22, Javonte Williams RB23, Devin Singletary, Trey Surman. I think you could make a case to start Trey Surman over those 4 more household name guys in that 21 to 25 range. So I'm confident in him. And this is a high ankle sprain. Even though they say it's a mild, that doesn't make sense. There is no such thing as a mild high ankle sprain. A high ankle sprain is a high ankle sprain. Usually you miss about a month, 3 weeks to a month with that type of injury, and he has not practiced yet this week. So I fully expect Surman to be the starter in week 5. he was obviously a top waiver out already, but word later in the week show, I think he could be worth a flex start or an RB2 spot if you're hurting with injuries and depth.
Another name that is worth bringing up from an injury perspective. Now, we're not dropping this guy. We're not trading this guy either, right? He's been the wide receiver 2 in half PPR scoring so far this season. Malik Neighbors dealing with a concussion, suffered last Thursday night against Dallas. I kind of have two things that I'm curious to hear from you here, right? Number one, is it worth looking into other Giants receivers like a Wan'Dale Robinson or a Darius Slayton to potentially slip into your lineup if you have Neighbors? And number two, like Malik Neighbors owners don't need to be out here trying to sell him or get rid of him. Like he's going to be back in a week, we think. But if you're a Malik Neighbors owner, what's your plan this week? Are you going after one of those other Giants guys?
I don't think you need to. I mean, Wan'Dale, I think that's a different story. I'm not going after Slayton, right? I rank 70 receivers a week, Dalton, and he's not in my top 70 this week. Unless Neighbors is ruled out, I might put him like right inside the top 70. You got to be in a really deep league. I'm talking about like guys like Greg Dortch, Rashad Bateman, Noah Brown, Jalen Polk. Those are guys I would rank Slayton around. Yeah, that's just where I'm at. I think with Seattle, it's not a crazy difficult matchup, but it's also not the best matchup in the world either. I'd call it pretty neutral there. They have some talented defensive backs as well. I'm still confident that Neighbors can still play because he got the concussion on Thursday last week, so we've still got some time. It's almost like a week and a half off instead of just a traditional week. So stay tuned on that. With the way teams are careful these days, I wouldn't be surprised if he misses. I have him ranked as of now. I do have Wan'Dale Robinson ranked as my wide receiver 33. We've got 4 teams on a bye this week, Dalton. And, Wan'Dale in full PPR, we call him a PPR scam. He's a PPR scammer. He passes 2 yards from the line of scrimmage. This past week, 14 targets, 11 catches, 71 yards. Like when a guy's catching an average reception for 6.5 yards, nothing's exciting about that. But the fact remains that he still is valuable in those types of formats. Even with that amount of targets in full PPR, he was still just a wide receiver 17 in week 4. Normally somebody gets 14 targets, they could be the wide receiver 1 overall. So you don't have like that true ceiling, but he does offer you that like full PPR type of floor where I certainly wouldn't mind 18 fantasy points from my wide receiver this week if I'm in a pinch. So I already have Wan'Dale in that like startable wide receiver 3 flex range this week. If Neighbors is ruled out, I don't know if I really bump Wan'Dale up too much because I think Neighbors takes a lot of attention away from him that allows him to thrive underneath. But I probably could see myself bumping Wan'Dale maybe from like wide receiver 33 into like the late 20s, maybe like 4 or 5 spots. I wouldn't go too crazy with it. And I'm not interested in anyone else. By the way, Devin Singletary hasn't practiced yet this week. So, add Tyrone Tracy just in case. Very talented running back, converted wide receiver from Purdue. Had really good college tape and athletic measurables at the combine. He's absolutely worth like that one injury away list that we talk about and that I write about on Sundays at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette website. He will be moving up those ranks for me as I update those each week, every Sunday moving forward for the rest of the season.
Sounds good. There's one other backfield that I think is worth touching on from an injury perspective. Jonathan Brooks, the rookie for Carolina, was expected to be activated off the IR this week, and he wasn't, right? So there's some clear concern there with his health, but it's worth noting Chuba Hubbard has been excellent. Yeah. And so you wonder, how do those two things relate to one another? What's your advice to fantasy owners of Jonathan Brooks and of Chuba Hubbard, given what we're seeing there?
Yeah, like you said, Chuba's been great. I mean, in terms of expected fantasy points and usage, he's RB 18 on the season. He's a locked-in starter for you. He thrives in good matchups, and even in tough matchups, I think that you can trust him, especially given the way that Andy Dalton has opened up this offense. Just in the last 2 weeks alone, with Andy Dalton under center, he's RB 6 overall in usage. He's ahead of guys like Jordan Mason, ahead of Breece Hall, ahead of Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, Devon Etienne. So I think that the initial opinion last week was that it sounded like the Panthers were getting ready to bring Brooks back. They were going to open up the window for him. You know, the ACL injury he suffered was well over a year ago. Usually you don't need much more time than that, but he was still a high draft pick. Maybe they're being extra careful with him because as much as Andy Dalton improves the Panthers, I don't think they're a playoff team. And I don't even know if they think they're a playoff team. So what are they really doing here? I think they're just trying to tread water in a sense, keep Dave Canales from not getting fired in his first year as head coach. So playing for pride, those types of things. So I think with Hubbard, like he's more of a buy to me at this point because they're going to take their time in bringing Brooks back. And by the way, when they open the window for a guy like that, that means they think he's ready to practice and play in 3 weeks, not right away. They don't even think that Brooks is 3 weeks away. So look, week 12, week 13, maybe Brooks comes back. But I think even when he comes back, it's going to be a slow ramp-up process, and I don't think they're going to fully take away the job from Hubbard either. If this is a competent offense, a heavy pass offense with Dalton, you could see 2 running backs being startable every week, just like we saw with the Bengals with Zach Moss and Chase Brown last week. I think you could see it here. If you have a Panthers owner who at some point soon is scared of Brooks coming back, I think you buy low on Hubbard, and I still think Brooks is worth stashing on your roster, and maybe a month from now, people start getting tired of waiting for him to come back. I think there could be some buying opportunities from him as well. They both could be startable in the future. We'll have to wait and see what really happens.
And speaking of players that, you know, we might be looking to buy low or sell high on from a rest of season perspective, you've got your, you know, rest of season rankings out, top 250 that you've got ranked here. Couple guys that stick out to me. You know, you mentioned Deontay Johnson as a guy that is probably worth buying right now. Obviously, the volume in Carolina has been there, but it also seems like there are some trade rumors around him. I think I kind of understand why you have him 22 spots ahead of ECR for the rest of the season. But, you know, looking down this list, there are some other guys that really stick out to me. One of them that I'm particularly interested in is Devonte Adams. And obviously with Devonte, he's been in the news a ton this week with the trade request, the rumors of him being disgruntled. Obviously, he's dealing with a hamstring issue as well. What is it that has you so much higher? Right now, you've got Devonte at you know, number 33 overall the rest of the season. ECR, which is consensus rankings, has him around 53 overall. What makes Devonte Adams potentially a player to buy on right now?
Yeah, like I don't know if I'm like rushing out to buy Devonte Adams, but I mean, he had 21 targets in his last 2 games. In week 2, he had 12 targets, 9 catches, 110 yards, right? He's only played 3 games. So the target earning ability at an elite level is there for Devonte. I think it's like, think about the trade options for Devonte for a second. The 2 most rumored places at this point are Kansas City. And if he goes to Kansas City, he becomes Rashee Rice and maybe even better than that. So I think you have to bake in that upside at some point. You can't just bet on that because maybe he doesn't even get traded. I think he does get traded, though. He could go to the Saints. They have Olave and Shaheed, which is really funneled to those 2 guys, but it's really more because they don't have anybody else, right? So you're talking about a 3 wide receiver set of Devonte, Olave, and Shaheed. They're pretty efficient passing the ball. I trust the play calling of Clint Kubiak. I think that his value increases there as well. Maybe if he goes to Pittsburgh, I downgrade him a little bit, but I don't know if I would downgrade him in Pittsburgh much lower than he is already in Las Vegas, right? So it's just for me, like, you know, I'm not rushing out to buy him, but I do see value in not selling him if he's on your roster and you just have to wait out a couple weeks of like not knowing what's going to happen. I think something sooner rather than later gets done. And I'm kind of putting my chips in of like, it sounds like the 2 most logical places right now are Kansas City and the Saints. And I think that he gets bumped up in both of those scenarios from Las Vegas. So if you look at my wide receiver rest of season rankings only, I'm 9 spots higher. I've got him as wide receiver 16, right in front of Tyreek Hill. Consensus has him as wide receiver 25. So I feel like it's weird when you ask me that. Like, I don't feel like I'm super high in Devonte, but obviously the rankings show I'm higher than others. So take that for what you will. I'm trying to kind of give you my thought process there, but I do see bullish reasons to either hold or maybe buy low, because I don't think it would cost too much to acquire him with the hamstring injury missing just this week in week 5.
Fair enough. And another guy here that I think is worth discussing on the other end of the spectrum, we talked a little bit about Jonathan Taylor's high ankle issue, right? And like, does this become a multiple week issue? He sticks out like a sore thumb in your rest of season rankings as well, because consensus on him is top 6 player, and you've got him down at 16.
Yeah.
I mean, if there are people willing to pay that price on him as if he's a bona fide, comfortable RB1, are you selling?
You're saying I got him at RB16.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes. So I think ranking him as the RB6 rest of the season is just flat out wrong. He has missed a lot of games, specifically with ankle issues over the last couple of years. This is like not isolated random incidents. Like there's something going on here. And a high ankle sprain is usually multiple weeks, possibly even a month. Even when you come back, there's risk of re-injury if you rush it back. Those are concerning for me with Taylor. He's never been super involved in the pass game either. I mean, look, if you had a crystal ball and told me that Anthony Richardson was going to miss the rest of the year and it would be Joe Flacco, I'd move Taylor up because I think he'd catch a lot more passes from Flacco and be in a more efficient offense in general. But Anthony Richardson's injury from week 4 is not considered to be serious whatsoever. He has a strong chance to play in week 5. So I just think for those reasons alone, I'd rather have the upside of like the Packers offense with Jordan Love under center. I'd rather have Josh Jacobs. I'd rather have Montgomery and Gibbs. I'd rather have Aaron Jones, who's like top 5 in RB usage right now for maybe the best offense in the league in the Vikings at the current point. So I feel like I've kind of got him in a range where like I got red flags about Taylor. I've got red flags about Devonte Etienne without 2 under center. I've got red flags about another guy who's dealing with an ankle injury and not practicing this week is Joe Mixon. So I have Taylor and Mixon ranked back to back. And they're kind of in that same boat. They're kind of like a tier cutoff for me to where after those two, then you get into guys that are going to get you more points this week and maybe the next few weeks, which is Brian Robinson, Tony Pollard, guys like that. So that's kind of how I'm treating this whole rest of the season rankings when it comes to those two high-end running backs who we don't know when they're going to play again, and that's concerning to me.
Cool. Let's jump into some week 5 specific talk here. A little bit of start sit, right? And again, we're going to focus on guys that you are a little bit higher, a little bit lower than the market on. Couple guys per position here. Quarterback, you're pretty in line with consensus. Not a whole lot of change here. I know you were a little bit higher on market than Baker Mayfield going into Thursday Night Football, certainly based on the first half we've seen.
That looks pretty darn good right now, Dalton.
Yeah, based on the first half we've seen so far there, that looks pretty good. I think Kyler Murray may be in a tough matchup this week at San Francisco. You've got him down at QB 11. Talk to me about what makes Geno Smith or Joe Burrow and a couple of these guys that aren't so mobile-oriented better starts than Kyler Murray if you happen to have both.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. One thing I've done, Dalton, and it's the reason why through 4 weeks now, I'm number 1 in quarterback accuracy rankings. I think it's because I had to look myself in the mirror. Talk about an issue to have. Kind of half kidding here, but I had to look myself in the mirror in terms of my quarterback rankings and my quarterback outlook in fantasy and be like, I think I am just overvaluing the rushing quarterbacks to an extent. And when you look at, I repeat this all the time, you can catch on Twitter. I post a weekly usage and utilization deep dive where I give, it's a 32 tweet thread. And it's basically each tweet is for each team. Here are my top takeaways on that team for the past week and how we want to treat them moving forward as a buy, a sell, waiver ad, etc. Make sure to check that out. I post that every week for free directly on my Twitter at Mad Journalist, MADD Journalist with 2 Ds. Okay, got that out of the way. Pass rate over expectation, you're going to hear me bring that up a lot. It's a very important metric to look at because we want teams that are passing the ball even in neutral situations. Like when they're not, we don't have to worry about them only passing when they're trailing by a score or 2 scores. When it comes to pass rate over expectation, Seattle, Tampa Bay, Minnesota, Cincinnati, those are 4 of the top 5 offenses in the league, and they're by a wide margin. So I want to buy all four of those skill players in terms of pass catchers and their quarterbacks. One thing I don't even understand, Dalton, and I put a lot of thought and time into these rest of season rankings. I have Baker Mayfield as my rest of season QB 10. Going into tonight, the industry had him as QB 15. That just makes no sense to have him outside like the first tier of starters. So, he fits that mold. Geno Smith, Sam Darnold fit that mold. So does Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, by the way, is the quarterback 2 in expected fantasy points per game per PFF this year, only behind Jalen Hurts. So he's actually left meat on the bone when it comes to that Bengals offense. So yes, I always lean towards rushing quarterbacks when I'm drafting for season long, but do not discount the upside of these pass rate over expectation offenses, because they can really get you there consistently and provide kind of a sneaky floor, even if they don't run the ball at all on a week-to-week basis.
Cool. And I don't think there's too much more worth discussing at the quarterback position. Looking at running backs, right? And look, most leagues, people are going to be starting 2 running backs. So a lot of the guys we're going to look at, guys within that like 16 to 32 range, right? Where maybe you're on the fringe of figuring out whether you're going to start them or not. Chase Brown is a guy that you've got up at RB20. So you have him solidly in that RB2 tier.
Yep.
ECR and Chase Brown has him at 27. Worth noting, you've got Zach Moss 2 spots ahead of him at 18. It seems that you're under the impression that the Bengals have 2 startable running backs. I'd love to hear why that is. And what I think you like Zach Moss better, but I feel like Chase Brown might have the better upside.
Okay, yeah. So there's a couple layers to this type of question here. So first of all, it gets really thin, Dalton, after like the top 8 or 9 running backs this week. Why? Because look at who we have on bye: J.K. Dobbins, Jahmyr Gibbs, Dave Montgomery, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard. That's 5 guys right there in the top 15 that we're removing. And we're getting a bunch of guys getting bumped up because of that, right? I would say with Chase Brown, you want to believe in the Bengals off. They have one of the most efficient offenses. Yes, they're 1-3. Their defense has looked terrible, but you know what a bad defense means? It means more possessions for the offense, and it means more fantasy points. I think that I want to buy every player in this Bengals offense that's relevant, which is obviously, look, I mean, Jamar Chase, can you really buy him? Probably not. T. Higgins, I actually think you can. He's been like a fingertip away from having multiple touchdowns in the last 2 weeks since coming back. And we know he's a big-time red zone threat for Burrow. And he's the type of receiver with talent that can get you double-digit targets almost every week. Now let's go to the running backs. Like, we've seen the Bengals backfield be a consistent top 10 position in fantasy year in and year out when they only had Joe Mixon in the past. Now they're using 2 backs. But look, here's the thing with Moss. They trust him in pass protection. 3rd downs, 2-minute drill. He's on the field and Brown is not. Those are high-value touches. Those are screen passes to running backs. Those are dump downs. Those are potential more goal line touches. So he's still getting the high-value touches. And honestly, Moss has looked good. Let's not discount what Moss has done either, just because Chase Brown had 1 good game. But the fact that, like, this is a high-octane offense right now, and they're in a game, when you look at the over-under for Cincinnati-Baltimore, Dalton, that's the highest over-under this entire week. They're expected for 50.5 points. So I want a piece of that somehow. And I think a sneaky ad, we'll get to it later, but like even like a uprising rookie tight end in Eric All Jr., who's had 4 catches in 3 straight games for them, even he's someone I'm willing to stream at tight end over guys like Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. So I'm buying the Bengals, and I'm buying both running backs this week and for the rest of the season. I think they're both going to be in that top 20 to 25 range.
Yeah, the Bengals offense in general, like, they're sitting at 1-3, and I think a lot of people have kind of written them off because of how terrible that team started. But the Bengals are getting up and down the field comfortably. Like the offense is not the issue there. The issue is they can't stop a nosebleed.
I mean, Joe Burrow might be off to the best start in his career, by the way. I mean, he's really ripping it right now. So I wouldn't count out the bit. And you look at their season over under win total on the sports books, it's like at 9.5 still. So like the betting market, the sharp market, like they're telling you they expect the Bengals to win 10 games. So it kind of goes to show you still want to be buying in on this offense, because not only is the offense going to play well, they're going to be competitive late in the season, even if they're just kind of fighting and clawing for one of those wild card spots in the playoffs.
One more running back I want to touch on before we jump over to wide receivers. Travis Etienne is a guy that I think was probably kept in a decent number of keeper leagues. This is a guy that, was considered one of the more valuable assets in fantasy last year and a few years before that as well. You've got him down at 22. So he's still in the RB2 range.
God.
You still have him at RB22. But I think it's notable to a lot of people that he's behind those Bengals backs. You've got him behind Kareem Hunt, right? You've got him behind Jerome Ford. So, it seems like Tank Bigsby might be more talented than he is, at least to the naked eye when I watch. Yeah. What are you seeing with Jacksonville's backfield?
I agree. I think you nailed it on the head right there. In the 2 games that Bigsby has been healthy, let's keep in mind he got hurt early week 2, came back in week 3, but wasn't right. So I would almost scratch Tank Bigsby completely in terms of his week 2 and week 3 kind of duds in the box score. But when you look at week 4, against a pretty good Texans defense, by the way, Bigsby 7 carries for 90 yards, had a 58-yard run. We don't see that explosiveness that often these days from Travis Etienne. Etienne, 11 carries for 50 yards. Pretty pedestrian, I would say, overall. And when you look at back to what they had when they were both healthy together against like an okay run defense in Miami, nothing great, nothing to be afraid of either. Bigsby, 12 carries for 73 yards, had a long run of 26. Etienne, again, a very similar pedestrian, about 4 yards a carry, 12 carries for 44 yards. Etienne, even without Bigsby in the lineup, this guy has not exceeded 13 carries in any single game this year. A lot of it's because the Jaguars have been trailing a lot, but even the targets he's getting, he's not converting them to much either. This offense is broken. This team is broken. Peterson right now is the betting favorite to be the first coach fired in the NFL. I think they look to a new direction here. They've been talking about for years wanting to lighten Etienne's workload, and they put a lot of investment into Bigsby. Had a miserable rookie year last year. You remember we were high on him going into the season, and he busted drop passes, fumbles. They stuck with him. They worked with him a lot because his college tape and measurables coming out of Auburn were very strong. And he was also a very good pass catching running back in college. So I think it's a late breakout for Bigsby and a running back in decline in Etienne. And I want to be ahead of the market on that. RB22, just in my mind, optically, it sounds too high for Etienne, but given all the bye weeks, I kind of like have to put him there. I've got him 8 spots lower than consensus. But again, once you get past the Bengals backs, in my opinion, I start to lose confidence quickly in a lot of these backs between RB20 to RB36, for example.
One wide receiver that sticks out to me quite a bit, I think a lot of people across the country are still confidently starting Zay Flowers based on some things that he might have done for them earlier this season. Ooh. You have Zay Flowers all the way down at wide receiver 37. Yep. For context, that puts him right behind Jerry Jeudy, Michael Pittman, Jawan Jennings, right in front of Khalil Shakir. Obviously we're expecting points, right? We talked about that. We're expecting points between Cincinnati and Baltimore, yet you still have Zay Flowers way down here. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, the wide receivers in the top 25 are pretty darn good, even in the top 30. I mean, I've got Tyreek Hill at wide receiver 30 this week. Like, I cannot, in good conscience, rank Zay Flowers out of Tyreek Hill, even with no Tua. Xavier Worthy, Christian Kirk, Dontavian Wicks with no Christian Watson in Green Bay. George Pickens getting a ton of targets in Pittsburgh. I can't rank Zay ahead of those guys. And then he's in this range between, let's say, wide receiver 31 to wide receiver 40, where I kind of feel like he belongs in this range. He's like a wide receiver 3. If the Ravens are beating the Bengals, Dalton, they're going to be running on them. So I think you really have to consider and factor in there's an extremely low floor with Baltimore. When you look at their pass rate over expectation, it's the worst in the league. They pass in neutral situations less than any other team in the league, minus 12%. For context, once you get past like in the middle of the league is like around 0, like around minus 1%. They're at minus 12%. It's a huge difference. So they're even in terms of just general pass rate outside of taking game script into account, they're still bottom 3 pass rate in the league. So I got a fact. Maybe if we hear Anthony Richardson is starting this week, maybe I bump Pittman and Downs down a few spots, and Zay Flowers goes ahead of them. But I don't think I can really move him much higher than like wide receiver 30. He's kind of stuck in this wide receiver 30 to 40 range because look, man, like the first 2 weeks were great. He was getting peppered with targets around the line of scrimmage, right? But the last 2 weeks, man, like 6 targets, 4 catches for 30 yards. Like he's averaging 15 yards a game over his last 2 games. He's only had 1 good week, Dalton. 91 yards in week 2 with a touchdown. Even in week 1, 10 targets is great, but 37 yards is not going to cut it on 6 catches. So I'm sorry. If Zay Flowers has a good game this week and he's on your roster, enjoy the points and sell him ASAP. That's my biggest takeaway for Zay Flowers right now.
On the flip side, a guy that for as long as this guy has been on draft boards and in the NFL, you have been the biggest Tank Dell fan I know. And I don't know how much of it's just because his last name is Dell, but
it's becoming a bit now.
It is. And once again, going into this week, you've got him up at wide receiver 25. So a fringe wide receiver 2. That's 18 spots ahead of ECR. For some context there, you've got him ranked right between, guys like Brandon Ayuk, Jackson Smith and Jigba, George Pickens, ahead of Tyreek Hill, Xavier Worthy. I think there are a certain cohort of people out there who would be surprised to see you having him ahead of even Zay Flowers.
Sure.
In a crowded wide receiver core in Houston, what makes you so bullish on Tank Dell?
Yeah, so I think we're set for a lot of points and a lot of passing in this game here against Buffalo. When the Texans offense is going to be pushed, we're looking at an over-under of 47.5, which is the 3rd highest on the week. Tied for 3rd between Packers and the Rams as well. When you got to look at the underlying data, Dalton, when it comes to Tank Dell. First of all, we had the sample from last season. When he was fully healthy, he was getting better usage than Nico Collins was. He has a very special relationship with CJ Stroud. What we saw so far this year with Tank Dell is that he came into week 1 banged up, still saw 7 targets, by the way. Then I believe it was week 2. It was a very low volume game. CJ Stroud overthrew him on he was like a fingertip away from running to the house for like a 65-yard touchdown. If that one play would have happened, we would be having a completely different conversation right now. And then he comes back in week 3, gets hurt, but still finishes the game with 6 targets, 5 catches, 62 yards. In the 2 healthy games he's played, 13.3 yards per catch, 12.4 yards per catch. So I want the young player with upside that also runs the deep, big play, explosive routes and has the chemistry with CJ Stroud. And those are the things we're all getting together with a player like Tank Dell. And when you look at PFF, for example, and I'll cite them often, expected wide receiver points per game, Tank Dell is still top 25 on the year overall. And that's with him, quote unquote, underperforming. He's actually in the same expected fantasy points per game range as CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, JSN, Godwin, JMO. Tank Dell's usage, underlying metrics are right in that same category, and that's where we thought he'd be before the season. So I'm not going to panic. I think he's a fantastic buy low in fantasy. Maybe I love him a little extra because he's my long-lost brother from another mother, but man, I like the player in general overall. I liked him last year as a rookie coming into the league. I'm all in. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but Diggs has gotten lucky catching a few touchdowns. Those things can be spread around to Nico and Tank Dell easily when they're all healthy. So I'm still buying it on my guy Tank Dell right now.
We'll take a brief look at tight ends, and partially because there's a name that I want to point out. We've talked about him a couple times. Taysom Hill. You actually in a 12-team league, you've got him right there on the fringe as a starter at tight end 11. Now, Taysom Hill's a little bit different from a discussion standpoint from every other tight end out there. Obviously with him, we're talking about the possibility of him running the ball. Possibility even of him throwing the ball, right? Obviously played quarterback in college. Dealing with a rib injury, he is questionable, but if he plays, you really like the Monday night matchup at Kansas City for him.
Yeah, I do. Look, man, like this is when I have a guy ranked, I would say like almost 90% of the time, I'm assuming they're going to play and be healthy, right? If a guy misses practice like early in the week, I typically just remove them from the rankings until they get back to practice. It's just my process with it. So with Taysom Hill, I think you have to look at last week. Like he was the clear. Alvin Kamara admitted, by the way, that he's playing with multiple broken ribs right now. So, and that's what Taysom Hill just got. So I just want to see the practice reports, Dalton. I don't know if I saw anything today on him, whether he was going to practice in a limited fashion or not. Him and Kamara are dealing with the same injury. And then you throw on the top that, like, I believe the Chiefs right now are they are number one in the league in expected fantasy points allowed to tight ends. I mean, we saw what Isaiah Likely did against them in week one. In week two, Mike Gesicki had like the game of his life against them for the Bengals. So that they're kind of funneling things to the tight end position, which is why I actually also did rank Juwan Johnson this week 2 spots above ECR. So let's say if Taysom Hill is ruled out and it's just Juwan Johnson, I might move Juwan Johnson as high as like tight end 16, like right above that range where like Zach Ertz, Dalton Schultz, Colby Parkinson, because man, like after tight end 7, in my opinion, the tight end upside completely disappears. And Tucker Kraft, by the way, is comfortably in that top 7. I am fully trusting him as a starter this week as a top 7 tight end overall in fantasy.
Yeah, the fascinating thing with Kraft too is you're not even really ahead of market with that. I mean, ECR has him at 7 as well. It's funny. One of the leagues that I'm in with you, I picked up Tucker Kraft and started him because I was missing Trey McBride, and the guy I was playing against was sending me direct messages in the fantasy app asking me how in the world I knew to do that, and I was like, well, I don't know. Good question. As far as other tight ends of note here, obviously we've talked a lot about David Njoku. I know you're a lot higher on him than the market. Sure. Is there anybody else? I know we've talked about Eric All. Anybody else in the tight end position that you really think is worth discussing? You're pretty much in line with market on most of them.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, Njoku, if you can afford to buy low and just stash him on your bench until he's back, like once he's back, he's going to smash. Whether it's Winston, whether it's Watson. We saw the usage last year. He was the number 1 tight end in fantasy from week 9 onward. Even in week 1 this year, before he left that game with an injury, by the way, he already had 5 targets, 4 catches, 44 yards. That was the tight end 9 in the week. He didn't even finish the game. So he's absolutely top 10 for me. I'd put him right outside like we have an elite tier right now, a tier 1, even though they're not all performing as elite tight ends. Kelsey, Kittle, McBride, Ferguson, Bowers, even though Bowers has looked pretty suspect in usage the last couple of weeks as well. And Njoku's right there. And with one or two healthy weeks under his belt, I mean, is it that far-fetched to say Njoku could be tight end 1 in 2 weeks from now? I mean, that's certainly a possibility. So I want to factor that upside into the equation here because we also saw it last year. And there's also rumors, by the way, Dalton, of the Browns trading away Amari Cooper. And if that happens, then, man, we're going to see extra targets funneled to Jerry Jeudy and Njoku in a hurry here. But, yeah, like Eric All, I do want to mention in deeper leagues, dynasty leagues, I think he's a fantastic ad. Comes from, like, the ultimate tight end production factory in college from Iowa University. Got drafted a little bit later than expected because he was dealing with some injuries in his last year in college. But, man, like he's his target per route run rate, which is indicative of future talent and volume, is extremely high this year, and he's starting to work his way more into things. They're throwing him the ball. He's very efficient catching the ball. He's got some juice and athleticism. I think they like him a lot more than the other guys in their roster, like Drew Sample, Mike Gesicki, Tanner Hudson. I think at some point soon, Eric All is going to work his way into a near every down route runner at tight end. And if he does, in that Bengals offense with that pass rate we talked about, he could also be easily a locked-in top 10 tight end the rest of the way. So I want to stash him where I can right now as well.
Let's talk briefly about some kickers and defenses, and we won't spend a ton of time on this, but I think a couple defenses that you're a little high on. You like a couple NFC North. You like the Green Bay Packers. You have them up at the 4th-ranked defense, a little bit heavy, at 5 spots ahead of ECR on that. You've got the Vikings up at number 3, 4 spots ahead of ECR. I want to really endorse the Vikings here.
Yes.
For one, they are going to be blitzing, getting after Rodgers. This is a team that's consistently been just as good as anybody on defense. And I don't want the 29 points they gave up at Lambeau to fool anyone, because they were in total control of that game. And I think they were kind of letting Green Bay take a little bit of what they wanted as that game went along to just maintain control of it. And this Jets offense, we haven't talked a lot about Jets players on tonight's show, but the Jets offense looks pretty broken. And I know weather was a factor against Denver, but I haven't watched a game with their offense yet this year and come away from it impressed. Look, Rodgers is not made. I don't think he's made a turnover worthy play yet this year, which is worth noting, but he's also just not really hitting very many targets downfield. So I actually think that game in London between Minnesota and the Jets could be pretty low scoring in general. But the offense that I trust is absolutely Minnesota between those two. So I love how high you have Minnesota. Totally endorse that. Any other defenses you think are worth discussing this week? Maybe Green Bay, with you having them a little bit higher in the market as well.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the Vikings, man. I think their defense is a problem for other teams right now. They're putting pressure on. First 3 weeks, they had a combined 16 sacks, 5 interceptions, and they're not allowing a lot of points either. So they're not just like blitz happy and give up the big play. They're doing a good job of being well-rounded. You want the pressure rate more than anything in fantasy, because that's going to lead to possible strip sacks, forced fumbles, return touchdowns, et cetera, sacks add up as well. They only had 3 points against the Packers last week, but they're the number 1 fantasy defense by far in average so far through 4 weeks. And, I don't think you're going to do much when Jordan Love is healthy with how that Packers offense looks. I still think that's not bad. They really shut him down the first half, and then Love kind of turned it on the second half. With the Packers, so I think the Vikings are like an every week start, in my opinion. Like, that's like the only defense I'm kind of looking at outside of like Pittsburgh, San Francisco, maybe, even though there's some holes there as well. Packers, I think similar to that. I think they're underrated in some of the metrics we're looking at. You look at what they've done so far in week 2 against Indy, 3 interceptions, 10 fantasy points. Against Tennessee, 3 turnovers, 8 sacks, 23 fantasy points. They had a touchdown there. Then last week against Minnesota's been one of the best offense in the league. Still scored 6 fantasy points, which is solid. 3 forced turnovers and 2 sacks. So I think when you look at their pass rush overall, I think they're a well-rounded defense, even though PFF's numbers don't love them a ton. But I think what I'm seeing from them on the field is, with the offense better, I think the defense is going to have more rest, more time off the field. They're going to perform better and more efficiently as well. They have some good pass rushers. I think these metrics start to get better and match the production that we're seeing in terms of the fantasy box score. And look, man, the Rams have nobody. Like, they're down multiple offensive linemen. They're, Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell are their top 2 receivers. Like, that's going to run Stafford into a lot of trouble. And Stafford likes to drop back a lot. So if the Rams abandon the run at any point and Stafford's dropping back 40 times, it's going to be like all wheels up for the Packers defense, racking up those pressures and sacks on him as well.
Looking at kickers, playing with kickers, you're always playing a little bit of a game of roulette, right? I mean, it's tough to know. There are just so many other factors, right, that go into whether a kicker has a great game or not. Brandon Aubrey, obviously notable for you this week. Sunday Night Football at Pittsburgh, you got him way down from where you normally would. Now, he's still your number 8 ranked kicker, so he's in that top 10. But,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that has to do with the fact that it can be tough to kick in Pittsburgh and that game's a little bit lower scoring.
Yeah, it's more because the total, honestly. 42.5 points. I'd rather have Braden Narvison for the Packers. Obviously I have Aubrey ranked higher because he's a bigger name and he's just done more over the last year and a half. But I am personally going to lean more to kickers and high game totals, especially in the Packers case. Like, they're actually implied for the third most points on the week. San Francisco's 1, Baltimore is 2, Green Bay is 3, Seattle's 4. So I think Jason Myers as well from the Seahawks is worthy to stream. Just go for the team that's projected for a lot of points, that's in a healthy over-under point total. Anything above 45, I think, is pretty solid. Obviously you want to look out for weather, indoor, outdoor. I think indoors always gets a little bit of a boost, but that's how I'm treating it this week. So I think even with like Jacksonville against Indy, that's a 46.5 point total. Indianapolis defense has been terrible so far through 4 weeks, which is why I have Jacksonville's kicker ranked 6 spots above consensus. So simple as that for me. That's what I want to look at. I think the plus matchup on paper for the offense can also correlate with a plus matchup for the kicker, because there's going to be more scoring opportunities for extra points and for field goal attempts in that type of scenario.
Yeah, the only guy I'm scared off of is Narvison in Green Bay, though. Like, the missed kicks with him are becoming a problem.
That's true.
Yeah, he might be losing his job sometime soon. But I like the game script for them from a kicking perspective should be pretty great out in LA against the Rams. In what, unfortunately for my Rams, might look like a little bit of a home game for Green Bay. So Chris, you ran a tweet out earlier this week that did pretty well, where you asked people to submit some fantasy football questions to the show. And so, I want to take about 5 minutes and run through a few of these. We had more than 100 people reach out. Really appreciate those who reached out with questions for the show. I want to focus on questions that, are maybe more thought-provoking than others. First one that I'll get to, this one comes from Charles Benberry at CharlesB_TV. Charles asks, who should I start in flex? 12-team half PPR. Keenan Allen, Rico Dowdle, Justice Hill, or Trey Surman?
Trey Surman.
Simple enough. I agree. I'm starting him in flex in one of my leagues as well. Another one here, Pickens versus Devonte Smith rest of season, Moss versus Chase Brown rest of season. This one comes from Dilzy, DYL at DYLZZI on Twitter.
You said Pickens versus Devonte rest of season?
I think I know which way you're going on that one.
I'll go Devonte. If you're desperate for a win, you need Pickens this week, but I still like the overall outlook. Steelers aren't going to pass as much for the rest of the season as they have been these past 2 weeks, in my opinion. What was the other one?
The other one is Zach Moss and Chase Brown in the Bengals backfield. Who do you prefer rest of season between those two?
I mean, does it matter? Like, when we have 2 guys back to back, like they're both going to be they both have upside and they both have contingent upside. If the other one gets hurt, they're going to be borderline top 10 backs, both of them. So I don't even think that question needs to be answered, Dalton. Like, they're both starters. Like, I had them almost back to back. So take for that what you will. I'm always going to give you a thoughtful answer. I'm not always going to give you the answer you want to hear. Sorry, not sorry.
Fair enough. For what it's worth, I would rather have Chase Brown. I just think that there is like a better athletic upside there. I like the speed with Chase Brown. So I'll give you an answer. I would take Chase Brown, but
okay,
it's definitely splitting hairs with that.
I'd rather have Zach Moss just to spicy things up a little bit. They don't trust Chase down on passing downs. Like he's played like 2 pass blocking snaps all season, and he's only had 1 good fantasy game. Moss has had 4 good fantasy games.
We've got somebody else here with a trade proposition, and it's your favorite kind because it's players at the same position. But I think these are interesting, right? Because when you go 2 for 2, it starts to complicate things a little bit.
Sure.
This person's wondering whether, and this is GS at Lattice Gratis, LATTICEGRATISE.
Very, very unique names here. We appreciate the names.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara and Drake London for James Cook and Collins in and Nico Collins in PPR.
Alvin Kamara and say it one more time.
Alvin Kamara and Drake London is one side.
Okay.
James Cook and Nico Collins is the other. Which side do you like better?
Well, I like Alvin Kamara and Nico Collins. So do we want to just include those two and have that be a 1-for-1? I mean, it just depends what you need. Those are the 2 best players in the deal. The other guys are you're just trying to throw guys into the pile. So I mean that's what it comes down to. I lean receiver unless it's a non-PPR league. So I'd rather have the Nico Collins side, I guess.
Here's one.
Quality over quantity. Quality over quantity usually is the way I go.
Yeah. So this week specifically, now I know your answer to this. This might surprise some people. And I think the reason I'm bringing this one up is because it's a player we haven't talked about yet who I really like this week, and I know you do too. At Grant H. Williams asks, am I starting Kyler Murray or Justin Fields this week?
Wow. Man, how things have changed so fast. Kyler has just not been looking good, man. I tried to bump him down this week. And this week specifically, because of how bad Dallas's defenses look, they're not going to have Micah Parsons or DeMarcus Lawrence. I've got Fields 6 spots higher than Kyler. Pretty decent gap there.
All right. And we're going to go to one more question here. This one comes from Rob Genowine, at Rob Genowine. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Start 2 of these in PPR. We got 5 players here. We're going to start 2 of them.
Okay.
Terry McLaurin, Khalil Shakir, Christian Kirk, Rashid Shaheed, Dontavian Wicks.
Start 2?
Starting 2.
Okay. I'm not starting Shakir. So we've got McLaurin, Wicks, Shaheed, and who else?
And Christian Kirk.
Oh, my gosh. First of all, I just want to say, look at my rankings. Like, I don't memorize my rankings, by the way. So I'm just gonna surface those up right now. I've got McLaurin, wide receiver 26. This is half PPR, by the way. I only make minor adjustments when you're adjusting for PPR and standard, by the way. You don't have to make crazy adjustments. People ask me that all the time. Okay, half PPR is pretty close to both in a sense. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 26. I've got Shaheed, wide receiver 29. I've got Christian Kirk, wide receiver 43. And what was the other one? Sorry, there's a lot of names.
Dontavian Wicks, Rashid.
Oh, okay, Wicks. Okay. I have Wicks pretty high at wide receiver 36. So I have McLaurin and Shaheed ranked the highest, and I'm okay with that. Even though I really like Wicks a lot, I think Shaheed and McLaurin are embedded top options in their passing game and passing games that we relatively trust right now.
Sounds good. All right, Chris. Well, appreciate you humoring the listener questions. We'll definitely pick some more out next week and moving forward, see what we can come up with.
Yeah, and by the way, like if you're listening here, like make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, PG Sports Now for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can catch my usage utilization report on Twitter. The deep dive I post usually goes up either Monday or Tuesday night, so it can be. It's kind of my process. I do that in order to accumulate the new data that's happened in the past weekend. And I use that to apply to my rest of season rankings and my weekly rankings, right? So I have a process. I do waiver rankings early in the week. Then I do my rest of season rankings, which is essentially a trade chart. Then I do my weekly rankings third. In addition to that, we're doing this show. I'm doing my free usage utilization deep dive thread on Twitter. And you can also catch at post-gazette.com my Sunday strategy column where I talk about 30 players in 30 words or less to know in addition to my stash and sleeper rankings, as well as my one injury away handcuff replacement running back option. So you can catch that all at post-gazette.com as well, and the rest of my content on my Twitter. I appreciate you making the time, Dalton. I think what I was going to say is, we appreciate you listening. Please subscribe. Leave us a rating and review if you're listening to the podcast. Give us a feedback if you can in a comment. Let us know if you prefer start-sit questions versus trade questions, because I think some of the trade questions might be more actionable to go over, since I do put out my rankings, and some of the start-sit stuff you can just literally look at the rankings to make those decisions on. So we'll try to get to a couple more questions next week. We don't want to go too super long and keep it to an hour or less, but let us know what you think. Let us know what type of questions you want to hear. We're open to feedback on this show to make it better and more valuable to you for listening. And we appreciate everyone engaging this week and tuning in so far as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will talk to you next week for week 6.